We begin tonight with the trouble with Donald Trump's national security picks. Among his many controversial and unqualified selections thus far, Tulsi Gabbard, his choice for Director of National Intelligence, looms as perhaps the most concerning of all. That's the message from nearly 100 former national security officials who say they are alarmed at the prospect of Gabbard leading the nation's intelligence community, overseeing all 17 intelligence agencies, including the CIA, and briefing the president daily on intelligence matters. In a letter obtained by NBC News, the officials noted several of Ms. Gabbard's past actions call into question her ability to deliver unbiased intelligence briefings to the president, Congress, and to the entire national security apparatus. Senate committees should consider in closed sessions all information available to the U.S. government when considering Ms. Gabbard's qualifications to manage our country's intelligence agencies. The officials said the Senate must carefully evaluate whether Gabbard is equipped for the job, given that she'd be the least experienced person to hold that position since it was created in 2004. The letter singles out one of Gabbard's most questionable acts. As a congresswoman, she made a secret trip to Syria and met with its authoritarian dictator, Bashar al-Assad, after which she said she was skeptical of U.S. intelligence findings that Assad's regime was behind a chemical weapons attack that killed dozens of people. Gabbard continued to defend her visit with Assad as a candidate for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, including when she said this in 2019.
Do you think Assad is our enemy?
Assad is not the enemy of the United States because Syria does not pose a direct threat to the United States.
What is Assad to the U.S.? What is the word?
You can describe it however you want to describe it.
I want to know how you describe it.
My point is that whether it is Syria or any of these other countries, we need to look at how their interests are counter to or aligned with ours.
The officials also cited Gabbard's penchant for parroting Russian propaganda and disinformation and her history as an apologist for Russian President Vladimir Putin. She posted this just 3 days after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022.
Presidents Putin, Zelensky, and Biden, it's time to put geopolitics aside and embrace the spirit of aloha, respect, and love for the Ukrainian people by coming to an agreement that Ukraine will be a neutral country.
This week, 3 former aides to Gabbard told ABC News that Gabbard's views on Russia have been shaped by consumption of Russian state media, saying that she regularly read and shared articles from Russian news site RT. Of course, Tulsi Gabbard isn't the only one of Trump's picks coming under fresh scrutiny. Pete Hegseth, his pick for defense secretary, faces an uphill battle with even some Republican senators. In the meantime, Hegseth's lawyer says his name has been submitted to the FBI for a background check. And after days of mixed messages over whether he'd potentially switch horses and back Florida Governor Ron DeSantis as defense secretary instead, today, Donald Trump publicly backed the former Fox Weekend host, posting on his social media that Hegseth's support is strong and deep, much more so than the fake news would have you believe, unquote. Pete Hegseth said tonight that he spoke again today with Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst, a key vote. And in his first network television interview as president-elect, Trump spoke with NBC's Kristen Welker about Hegseth's prospects.
It looks like Pete is doing well now. I mean, people were a little bit concerned. He's a young guy with a tremendous track record, actually. He went to Princeton and went to Harvard. He was a good student at both. But he loves the military, and I think people are starting to see it. So we'll be working on his nomination along with a lot of others.
Since you bring him up, do you still have confidence in Pete Hegseth?
Yes, I do. I really do. He's a very smart guy. I've known him through Fox, but I've known him for a long time. And he's basically a military guy. I mean, every time I talk to him, all he wants to talk about is the military. He's a military guy.
Have you gotten assurances from senators that he's going to be confirmed? Do you think he can make it?
No. I think he will, yeah. I've had a lot of senators call me up saying he's fantastic.
You don't drink yourself.
No.
You've talked about how devastating drinking can be.
Yeah.
How concerned are you that the person who you picked for this top job at the Defense Department, at least according to those who've worked with him, has struggled with drinking.
But I've spoken to people that know him very well, and they say he does not have a drinking problem.
Joining me now is Angelo Carusone, President and CEO of Media Matters, and Charlie Sykes, MSNBC contributor and columnist. I want to start with you, Angelo, first. I've known him through Fox. That is the way Donald Trump seems to decide who he wants around him, whether they're either a billionaire or he pardoned them in the past or has some other relationship personally with them that way. But in this case, it's someone he saw on TV. He likes the way he looks. He likes the way he talks about America. That's not the way we normally choose people for an important job like Department of Defense. But what do you make of that? And I'm sure Media Matters has a rich history of some of the things that Pete Hegseth has said and some of the things that Tulsi Gabbard has said. And when you go through your own archives on these two people, what do you make of it?
I mean, what I would just note at the top is that there's a revolving door between Fox and sort of the upcoming Trump administration and the past Trump administration. I mean, that is one of the criteria for likelihood of getting a job. And you sort of said something in your intro there that sort of hit the nail on the head, which is that he does think of this as theater, as central casting. And that's sort of disturbing, given all that we know about sort of rising authoritarianism and sort of that bent, because the reality is that authoritarianism is theater. And so part of what Hegseth's role is designed to do is to sort of play a part. He sort of sees him as somebody that is going to be out there representing the ideal of masculinity in the military and sort of a radical shift in how we think about that role and its orientation in our own public life and our daily lives. In terms of what they said that's disturbing, I mean, Hegseth is especially concerning because he's a Christian nationalist. Obviously his misogyny is prevalent, his policies and his perspectives there, but he's somebody that's a Christian nationalist, and he really believes that that Islam needs to be eradicated from the world. He sort of sees the military as not just a part of American foreign policy, but sort of as a flaming sword for Jesus. And that is going to poison the kinds of input and advice that he gives to Trump. It's certainly going to color his approach. And Gabbard, on the other hand, she is, like as you noticed, she's a Fox figure too. I mean, she was on air 122 times in the last year and a half. She guest hosted all the times, and her closest person at Fox was Tucker Carlson. And that probably illustrates where some of that extra sympathy for Russia comes from. She's not a credible messenger. She's pushed a long history of not just radical ideas, but she's a creature of the conspiratorial sort of right-wing fever swamps. And that is something now that in this new capacity, if she gets into this role, is she's going to be able to pluck things from the fringes and put them directly in front of Trump in a way that it used to have to filter its way through a couple tweets and right-wing radio shows. Now it'll just go directly from InfoWars to Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Charlie, I think Angelo has really sort of concisely put together what one of the challenges here is, right? Donald Trump's depth on issues is not very deep. It's Fox deep. It's what he sees on Fox, what looks good to him, what sounds good to him. And for a lot of his base, the information that they take in comes from social media, from places like InfoWars, as does Tulsi Gabbard, right? And, Pete Hegseth's ideas are more shaped in his social world, that the world of where he's thinking about kind of the ideas of the way he wants society to be. But these are managerial jobs, right? The job of defense secretary is a management job. It's managing 3 million people. It's managing a giant organization. It's managing a giant organization that's a big budget. He doesn't have any experiences doing that. And I want you to talk about that. And also specifically Tulsi Gabbard. She's going to come in there, and whatever RT has fed her in her life, she can then feed that to Donald Trump, who's already sort of subject to conspiracy theories. Here's Tulsi Gabbard talking about Russia. This is Tulsi Gabbard in her own words.
Putin has made very clear all along that their security, in his mind, is what's at stake here. And they do not want to see
I don't want to interrupt you,
U.S.
but
and NATO
Putin also said Ukraine is not a country.
It's not strategically possible to think that Ukraine is going to beat Russia.
You hear President Biden say, well, this is Putin's war. This is Putin's fault. It's Putin who's the one who's solely responsible. Well, the United States and some of these European NATO countries are fueling this war.
Charlie, this is her tweet in 2015 showing support for Putin. Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11 and must be defeated. Obama won't bomb them in Syria. Putin did. Never forget 9/11. I will note that the agency she's being tapped to head was created in 2004 as a result, right, to try to prevent another 9/11.
Right.
Your thoughts?
Okay, so, I mean, this goes right to the heart of it. It is not simply that they are unqualified or that they have personal quirks like drinking. These two nominees pose a real present danger to national security. They are dangerous to the security of the United States of America. Now, this is crucial because, of course, Donald Trump wants to portray himself as the advocate of the military and of a strong United States. But with Tulsi Gabbard, you have somebody who has been parroting the propaganda of some of the world's worst thuggish authoritarians, including Vladimir Putin. The fact is that she has been mainlining Russian propaganda, which will now, I think reasonably you can assume, will be part of the way that she tries to influence the president of the United States. Pete Hegseth, you know, the drinking is bad, and you know, on Earth 2.0 would alone be disqualifying, as well as the allegations about his treatment of women. But as Angelo just mentioned, he is also an extremist. He is a Trump loyalist who has, I would say, bizarre ideas about the role of the military, the role of the United States. And this is something that I think the Senate needs to focus on and the American people need to focus on. Do these two nominees make the United States stronger and safer, or do they bring into the very heart of the federal government real dangers? And with Tulsi Gabbard, where actually, does the information come from? What are her instincts?